Dear students, Module 6 is devoted for Malthusian theory, its importance, criticism and applicability. In this module, we will discuss as part of learning objectives the beginning of Malthusian theory of population and various editions of essay that is on population theory. The beginning of the Malthusian theory, let us discuss how it has been presented. Since the middle of the 18th century, population has been experiencing socio-economic and political changes because of industrial revolution. One of them is steady fall in mortality, especially child mortality, followed by infant mortality. The reasons for decline in mortality are like improved public health, increase in food supplies owing to agriculture innovation and smallpox inoculation and vaccination. Because of declining mortality and high fertility, population started growing rapidly. The rapidly growing population triggered fears among thinkers on the limited resources of land and agriculture yield expecting misery among people. Some writings have suggested adjustments between agriculture production and growing population by checks. Thomas Robert Malthus is the first economist to take up the systematic study of population growth and sustainable agriculture production with the supporting data in his famous book titled Essay on the Principle of Population, published in 1798. What this Malthusian theory of population deals about? Generally prevailing population scenario which are leading to formulation of population theory is important for us to understand. Thomas Robert Malthus was born on February 13, 1766, who died on December 29, 1834. The essay written by him is mainly aimed at opposing the favorable views on population growth as postulated by William Godwin and Mary Jean Anthony Condorcet. He titled the essay as An Essay on the Principle of Population as it affects the future improvements of society, with remarks on the speculations of Mr. Godwin, Mr. Condorcet and others. The various editions of essay on population theory by Malthus is important for us to present here. Malthus argued that the population tendency to grow faster than the means of subsistence is leading to human misery and also obstructing human progress. The second edition, which is as much expanded version of the first edition, has detailed like while the first edition contained his arguments against the opinions of Condorcet and Godwin, the second edition emphasizes on argument against the poor laws. Poor laws, according to Malthus, are meant for protecting the poor. Malthus thought that poor laws have encouraged population growth. He published 4 more editions subsequently. The 6th edition, published in the year 1826, famously called as An Essay on the Principle of Population, or a view of its past, present effects and human happiness, with an inquiry into prospects respecting the future removal or mitigation of the evils which it occasions. The 7th edition is published posthumously in 1872. What the central theme of the essay is about? In the first edition of the essay, Malthus has assumed that food is necessary for the existence of man, or food is needed for survival of population, and the passion between the sexes is necessary and will remain the same, or human reproduction will remain the same. After assuming and accepting the above two natural laws, Malthus went on arguing that while population increases in a geometrical ratio, the subsistence increases only in an arithmetic ratio. Thus, he is the first person to quantify ratios of both population growth and increase in agricultural production. His arguments have further been modified in the sixth edition of his essay. In chapter 2 of the essay, Malthus has made three propositions, namely 1. Population is necessarily limited by the means of subsistence. 2. Population invariably increases where the means of subsistence increases unless prevented by some very powerful and obvious checks. And 3. These checks and the checks which keep population under control are resolvable into moral restraint, vice, and misery. Malthus made an attempt to investigate what would be the natural increase of population if left unchecked and the rate at which subsistence could be increased. On the basis of these two assumptions, he made two basic propositions, and they are: 1. Population increases in a geometrical ratio, doubling itself in every 25 years, and 2. Agricultural production increases in an arithmetic ratio under the most favorable condition. It is depicted in the graph by showing its relation between population and food, like production growth. In y-axis, it is shown quantity, in the x-axis, time period, and the linear line is the production of food, and the curve which depicts is the population, and the crossing of population and production of food lines is what Malthusian catastrophe depicts. He concluded that taking the whole earth, the human species would increase as the numbers like 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, and the subsistence as numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. In that way, the human species will increase in geometrical proportion, whereas the subsistence in arithmetic ratio. In 2 centuries, the population and the means of subsistence would be in the ratio of 356 to 9. Malthus thus recognized the powerful checks on population growth, and he classified them into 2 headings. The first one is preventive checks, such as moral restraints like abstinence and delayed marriages, and also restricting marriage against persons suffering from poverty or physical or mental disability. Malthus included moral restraint and vice as voluntary checks. Malthus described moral restraints as abstinence from marriage either for a time or permanently. He believed that the voluntary checks are the only mode of keeping population on a level with the means of subsistence. He described vice as prevention of the birth of children. The second one is positive checks, according to Malthus, which leads to premature deaths like disease, starvation, war, resulting in what Malthus called as Malthusian catastrophes. Sometimes the positive checks are referred to factors which tended to shorten human lifespan, such as 1. Hazardous occupations like severe labor, excessive exposure to seasons, 2. Bad food or insufficient food, clothing arising out of poverty, 3. Bad nursing of children, 4. Excess of all kinds, and 5. The common diseases and epidemics, wars, infanticides, plague and famine. In the Malthusian population theory, there are criticisms that have come up on the theory, mainly from various subsequent scholars. Let us discuss about what are these major criticisms. Although the Malthus work was rejected by 1900, it again became prominent in the second decade of 20th century. It is again lost its prominence by 1934 and again regained interest after Second World War. The revival of interest in Malthus work was because of 1. The increased rate of population growth, 2. Consequences of rapid population growth, and 3. The realization of extinction of certain natural resources. What are the major critical comments? One of the major criticisms of the theory is that Malthus has assumed supply of land and the yield from land are limited. He did not visualize changes in agriculture production at that time of the 19th century. For instance, forest lands have been cleared for living and agriculture work was initiated. Number 2, agriculture is being revolutionized in increasing production manifold using new technologies like the system of rotation of crops, use of chemical fertilizers, and improvements in plant and animal breeding. Malthus had underestimated industrial development, which reduced the dependence on agriculture. The Industrial Revolution has brought many changes to reduce population dependence on agriculture, like 1. Faster and reliable modes of transport, 2. Expansion of land for agriculture and human settlements, 3. Supply of raw material for manufacturing, and 4. Development of new markets. These are all very important because the changes that have taken place subsequently due to introduction of various modes of transport and the agriculture revolution that has taken place, where the expansion of land for agriculture and human settlements had made inroads. The third, for instance, like supply of raw material for manufacturing, has tremendously brought industrial change and industrial production, and also the development of new markets which have created greater demand for various goods and services were not visualized by Malthus, which subsequently proved to be very important contributory factors. His religious beliefs prevented him from grasping the possibility of widespread use of contraceptives. Number 1. Malthus favored only the postponement of marriage and even permanent abstinence from sex as some of the preventive checks, as he never expected that the use of contraceptives will make a tremendous effect in the control of population, and also where the modern way of living will be influenced so that the number of children will be greatly restricted by the couple by using various methods of contraceptives. So the credit goes to the contraceptive technology, which subsequently brought an important change in the family size and of small family adoption, and also through family planning measures, it has brought down the control of population to a significant effect, which was seen especially in most of the countries of the world. 1. Malthus favored only the postponement of marriage and even permanent abstinence from sex as some of the preventive checks. Number 2, he disapproved of birth control methods. So, Malthus has expected that postponement of marriage and permanent abstinence from sex as only to be preventive checks, and he was not in favor of various adoption of birth control methods. Malthus was criticized for not using the latest data from the 1831 census of England, and further it was noticed that Kingsley Davis said that while the doctrines of Malthus are not empirically valid, but they are theoretically significant, because the relationship between subsistence and population growth were empirically, though not brought out by Malthus, but still it has a theoretical knowledge of contributing the relationship between subsistence levels and population growth. Malthus has brought out this relationship to the great contributions for the day on those days, because it has brought a scientific validation and a theoretical contribution in explaining the relationship that existed between subsistence and population growth. Thus, if we look at the Malthusian theory of population, it was one of the first and foremost theories which have tremendously contributed in understanding the relationship that exists between the agriculture development, the subsistence levels, and the contribution it contributes for population or growth. And the relationship, though it is shown that the population growth will be in the geometrical ratio and the subsistence levels will be in arithmetical level, though it is not properly validated and which was theoretically not clear in reality. However, the first time where the relationship between subsistence and population, by focusing the nature of relationship that exists, is more or less on a scientific lines, it has immensely contributed in understanding, and also it has given a major hint that the subsistence levels have a limit for its contribution, and the population, unless it is controlled, it will be a major deterrent for the overall development of a society. The type of checks which Malthus has proposed, though they are not adequate, and in reality there are certain issues that have been brought out by the subsequent authors, but still to an extent the contributory factors as listed by Malthus are also some of the factors that are still have been validated subsequently. In short, we can say that since the middle of the 18th century, population has been experiencing various socio-economic and political changes because of industrial revolution, and in this, one of them is a steady fall in mortality, and because of declining mortality and high fertility, population started growing rapidly. This rapid population growth have triggered fears among thinkers on the limited resources of land and agriculture yield, as expecting a misery among people, and that was the setting in which the Thomas Robert Malthus, who was the first economist to take up this scientific systematic study of population growth and sustainable agriculture production and its linkages, through his famous book titled Essays on the Principle of Population, which was published in 1798, has immensely contributed in the area of population and development. His population theory, as we saw, has a major two assumptions. The first is that the food is necessary for the existence of man or population, and the passion between male and female is necessary and will remain the same, or human reproduction will remain the same. And on the basis of these two assumptions, he made two basic propositions, and they are: population increases in a geometrical ratio, doubling itself in every 25 years, and agriculture production increases in an arithmetic ratio under the most favorable conditions. Though it was questioned subsequently, but still the relationship to a great extent was related to subsistence levels, and population was overall found to be a big alert for the subsequent authors to understand the type of relationship across these two phenomena. And also Malthus recognized that the powerful checks on population growth, and he classified them into two headings. One is preventive checks, another is positive checks. Preventive checks such as moral restraints like abstinence and delayed marriages, and also restricting marriages against persons suffering from poverty or physical or mental disability, though it is also questioned about the type of checks which he has presented, as he was not able to expect the influence of contraceptives, and its adoption by the people was conveniently not highlighted by him, because given his background and also the way in which he proposed how the preventive checks, by focusing mainly on moral restraints like abstinence and delayed marriages, and these two were again criticized by the subsequent scholars. Malthus included moral restraint and vice as voluntary checks, and he described moral restraint as abstinence from marriage either for a time or permanently, and he described vice as prevention of the birth of children. These also are the issues which were subsequently criticized by the subsequent authors. Malthus believed that the voluntary checks are the only mode of keeping population on a level with the means of subsistence, because he was of the view that by adopting voluntary checks, it will be stabilizing the population, and it will be at a level which will also be equated with the level of the means of subsistence. The second measure, which was labeled by him as positive checks, or mainly which leads to the premature deaths like diseases, starvations, war, and resulting in what he famously called as Malthusian catastrophes. These also are questioned. However, the major three criticisms against Malthus were: Malthus first assumed that supply of land and the yield from land are limited, which was found to be not true when it was empirically tested in some of the countries. The second criticism was that forest lands have been cleared for living and agriculture, so that the area for agriculture activities was consistently increased, and also our agricultural development has contributed immensely, which has to a great extent has taken care of for the additional population that comes out subsequently in the society. Agriculture is being revolutionized in increasing production manifold using new technologies like the system of rotation of crops, use of chemical fertilizers, and improvements in plant and animal breeding is also another important thing which Malthus could not visualize, that agriculture development by using modern new technologies also contributes for the agriculture production to a great extent. This will take care of irrespective of the population growth. To that extent, the relation between agriculture development and population growth again cannot be in the same level of thinking, or the way in which was related by Malthus was questioned. Next is, the Malthus has underestimated industrial development, which reduced the dependence on agriculture. He could not visualize that industrial development is another important factor that contributes, so that the dependency on agriculture will come down, but at the same time, the industrial development will make contributory factor to take care of the population. The third important aspect again is his religious beliefs that prevented him from grasping the possibility of widespread use of contraceptives. So, his belief that contraceptives have no important play in contributing for population growth, and that way he has never postulated that adoption of contraceptives becomes a major deterrent factor for population growth was questioned subsequently by the various scholars in the area of understanding the relationship between population and the subsistence level. Overall, it can be seen, though Malthus' contribution was questioned, and also the type of relationship that he has mentioned and the type of checks that he has promoted or postulated were also criticized, but overall we have to understand that Malthus was the first economist and also a demographer who immensely contributed in understanding the relationship first time in the world by bringing the subsistence level of agriculture, how it has a limited role to play, and their population, how it became a deterrent in terms of quality of life of the people, and their relationship was scientifically brought out by Malthus. His measures like positive checks, preventive checks, or those which have mentioned that agriculture development will not be there, industrial development will not be to that extent, all these measures which he never expected to play a major role in its influence in subsistence level were found to be incorrect. Subsequently, the way in which agriculture development was taken place through adoption of modern agriculture technologies was found to be that agriculture development to a great extent can be expanded, and another is to reduce the dependency on agriculture, the industrial development can take place, and people moving to industrials and contributing to industrial development also can play a major role as another factor to take care of the increase in population. Subsequently, the checks, that preventive checks like age at marriage increase and abstinence, which he postulated and also which he has mentioned as a preventive checks, to a great extent definitely have contributed to in explaining in reducing the population growth. However, given the adoption of modern contraceptive technologies and the way in which people prefer by using contraceptives, which he never prevented or presented in his checks, was another issue that led to major criticism in the theory. Similarly, the positive checks which he postulated was another important thing, like premature deaths, like disease, starvation, war, resulting in what he called Malthusian catastrophe, is also to a great extent was controlled with modern medical technology and also with the preventive measures. So, to that extent also the positive checks also were questioned by the various scholars who subsequently said that such measures are incorrect and there are alternative checks which have to be adopted, and the people themselves will propagate, and also in the society these alternative measures to a great extent will alter the type of relationship that exists between subsistence level of agriculture and population pressure which comes out. That's why, though the type of increase in population through geometrical ratio and the increase in the subsistence levels of agriculture with arithmetic ratio, though it was questioned that at the same level of relationship may not exist, However, it should be noted that such an increase and the type of relationship that is expected is to a great extent realistic in understanding the type of relationship between these two factors. Overall, we may conclude that Malthus' contribution to the relationship of population and development is immensely contributed in understanding the type of relationship that exists, the nature of the measures that are required to take care of, and this way Malthus has a unique place when we are talking about population theories.